The truth tried to speak, but ego yelled louder. I'm Ethan Blake, and I'm here to translate the wreckage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I want to try to separate policy and politics for a second. I know it's hard to do around this place, but I thought Senator Cornyn made a very good point in his opening remarks. I think Senator Schmidt made the same point that the policy here is very important. And I want to ask you your opinion on the policy. Professor, tell me briefly, I know you came to talk about auto pens, but tell me briefly about the 25th Amendment.
Well, Senator, the 25th Amendment provides the process by which to implement a principle that's in the original Constitution, which is when the president's unable to exercise the powers and duties of the presidency, somebody else exercises them, starting with the vice president. The 25th Amendment sets up a process by which, if there's a question whether the president is able to do that, the vice president and the heads of the executive departments can temporarily basically put the vice president in as acting president, and then Congress ultimately decides the question.
Well, the standard, is it not, Professor? The standard is disability of the president. Is that correct?
Unable to exercise the powers and duties.
Okay.
Yes.
Here's what I would like your opinion on, and the opinion of these two gentlemen here. You have all been staffers. You've worked in government. You've had a boss. In Mr. Spicer's case, his boss was the President of the United States. Let's suppose the president, you were using your experience as a staffer. You were working for the president, any president. Hypothetically a president. And let's suppose the president started talking like he was from outer space. Let's suppose the president became fatigued very easily. He couldn't finish a sentence without taking a nap. Let's suppose the president, he was just physically in bad shape, mentally and physically. Mentally, he may or may not have, you're not a doctor, neurodegenerative disease, but physically you can see you could bake a Thanksgiving turkey in the time it takes him to walk across the stage. What do you think, as a member of his staff, what do you think is your moral obligation to say, wait a minute, the president can't do the job anymore? I know you're loyal folks. You believe in your president, this president, whichever president. I'm speaking hypothetically. You're loyal. You want to be a good staffer, but you also have a moral obligation. How do you reach that decision, Professor? And I'll go to each of you.
Senator, I think the first thing you would have to do in a situation like that is exercise your own judgment. How serious is this problem? Because everybody has moments when they lose focus, it happens. But if somebody thinks this is a really serious problem, I think the first thing to do is the most difficult, which is to say to the president, because the 25th Amendment also provides that the president can say, I'm unable to exercise the powers and duties of my office.
And suppose the president
That would be extremely
says,
difficult, but I think it should
look,
be done.
Trust me, I can't. And it's clear to you that he has neurodegenerative disease and he can't. What do? Do you have a moral obligation as a staff member to go to the American people and say, we've got a problem here, it may cost me my career?
Senator, I think at that point you have an obligation to talk to the vice president, who is in charge of the Section 4 process under the 25th Amendment.
What about you, Mr. Wald? You have a moral obligation. I understand you want it to go away, you want to work it out with him, but you can't. When does a staffer have a moral obligation to stand up and say he can't be president anymore, she can't be?
Well, Senator, the 25th Amendment only works if individual staffers or officers of the United States exercise that kind of moral judgment.
That's what I'm asking.
I think always, as the professor said, and the presidency is an enormous burden, so it would be not one instance. It would have to be several instances of a failure to exercise judgment.
How do you make that decision? You're the staffer. I get it.
Yeah, well, I think it begins with prayer, of course, but after that, I think it's conversation with other staffers, and if you're unable to confront the president or to raise the issue with the vice president, you should resign.
What about you, Mr. Spicer? Do you stand up and do it and tell the truth and run, or do you have a greater obligation to your boss?
Well, luckily I didn't have that problem. But I would say that you have a moral obligation as an American, as a citizen, as a human being. If the leader of the free world cannot conduct themselves to make the decisions that are critical to this country and to the world, you absolutely have a moral obligation to follow the chain of command. And if they don't act, then you must.
Do either of you gentlemen disagree with that? Professor?
Senator, I think acting means talking to the people who have the responsibility or in a position under the Constitution to do something.
You don't
about the
agree with
situation.
Mr. Spicer?
Senator, I'm not sure exactly what he has in mind, other than talking about the people who can make
I'm
the
just
decision.
trying to ask. So you've all been staffers. Suppose you go to everybody you're supposed to go to, and they all say, "My advice to you is to shut up." Do you have a moral obligation as a staffer to say, "Look, this person can't be president of the United States. It isn't policy. He physically can't do it."
Senator Kennedy, it's not a question of whether a staffer has that obligation. It's whether you as an American have that obligation. And I think each and every one of us does.
Yeah, but you can see it. An American can't. Professor, what do you think?
Senator, I think there are situations under which someone in that position should speak publicly, but I also think that the views of a single individual who is not the person who is constitutionally responsible for taking measures should be considered by the public as just the views of of one individual who has some information about the subject.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He didn't name names, but we all knew who he meant. Senator John Kennedy didn't need to say Joe Biden. He didn't need to point fingers, because with one masterfully crafted hypothetical, he painted a picture so vivid, so undeniable, that the room could barely breathe. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't sarcasm. This was a constitutional wake-up call, and it hit like a freight train. Let's walk through what just happened. In one of the most emotionally charged and politically explosive moments we've seen in a Senate hearing this year, Kennedy grabbed hold of the 25th Amendment, not as some dusty legal relic, but as a live wire pulsing with urgency. And then, with precision only he can deliver, he posed the question that millions of Americans are already whispering at kitchen tables across the country. What do you do when the President of the United States no longer has the capacity to lead? He doesn't shout. He doesn't accuse. He just starts laying out the facts, slowly, hypothetically, but unmistakably. The president starts talking like he's from outer space. He becomes so fatigued he can't finish a sentence without a nap. He walks so slowly you could bake a Thanksgiving turkey before he gets across the stage. He may or may not have a neurodegenerative condition, but one thing is clear. He's not fit. And then Kennedy brings the moral hammer down on the witnesses. What's your moral obligation if you're working for that president? Boom. This wasn't just a legal question. It was a test of conscience, a referendum on whether anyone in Washington still has a spine. Because while the talking heads on cable news try to downplay President Biden's visible cognitive decline, Kennedy brought it center stage and dared these insiders to tell the truth. The professor hems and haws about judgment and moments of fatigue, but Kennedy keeps digging. You could see it. You're not a doctor, but you know. Do you go public? Do you go to the American people? The room stiffens. Sean Spicer, Trump's former press secretary, says it clearly. You have a moral obligation as an American, as a citizen, as a human being. Finally, a moment of clarity. But that wasn't enough for Kennedy. He wanted the real-world stakes. So he pushed harder. What if you go through the chain of command and everyone says, shut up? What then? Do you walk away or do you speak out? This is where the Republican backbone shows. While Democrats trip over themselves to protect the political machinery, Kennedy asks the fundamental question that cuts through the spin. Is the presidency about loyalty to a man or to the Constitution? And let's not pretend the context is unclear. Every American watching this can see President Biden's decline. They've seen him freeze mid-sentence, wander off stage, slur his words, and need handlers to guide him like a weekend intern. This isn't speculation. It's real, it's visible, and it's dangerous. And yet the Democratic Party and their media allies continue to prop him up as if the Commander-in-Chief of the United States is just another job where trying your best is good enough. Kennedy's message? That's not just irresponsible, it's immoral. Because when the leader of the free world can't lead, the entire nation suffers. Our adversaries watch, our allies worry, and our people lose faith. And the only thing standing between us and that collapse is whether someone has the guts to speak up. Kennedy put it this way: it's not just whether a staffer has an obligation, it's whether you, as an American, have an obligation. Exactly. This is bigger than politics. It's bigger than partisanship. This is about preserving the basic integrity of the presidency and ensuring that no one, no matter how powerful, is above accountability. Let's be honest. If this were a Republican president declining before our eyes, the left would be screaming for the 25th Amendment. There would be non-stop headlines, anonymous staffer leaks, primetime specials. But because it's Joe Biden, we get excuses, cover-ups, and distraction campaigns. Well, not anymore. Because the American people are awake. They're watching. And thanks to voices like Senator Kennedy, they know they're not crazy for asking the questions the media refuses to. This hearing may not have triggered the 25th Amendment, but it lit the fuse. Because if the people in power won't admit what we all can see, the people will find new leaders who will. And that's exactly what the America First movement is about: courage, clarity, and the unshakable will to speak the truth, no matter the cost. So let the DC elites tremble. Let the consultants spin. Because this moment, this was history knocking. And Senator Kennedy, he opened the door.